Berserker Armour explained. Guts' greatest weapon that is also killing him rapidly and endangering his friends. Ever since we first saw Guts take on the Snake Baron and his goons, we knew that he went berserk in life or death situations. Heck, the final piece of dialogue from the first chapter of Berserk is Puck literally calling the aftermath of Guts' battle with the Snake Baron the title of the manga itself. And as we trace Guts' journey through the story, we can see him progressively becoming more skilled and more feral with his fighting style. The Guts we saw before he became the 100-Man Slayer was a different person compared to the beast he became afterwards, and some of the things he did in his Black Swordsman era are best left unsaid. Which is why it's both baffling and a stroke of genius in our eyes that Kentaro Miura introduced the most iconic piece of armor in his entire story over 200 chapters into it. The Berserker Armour was probably not even in his mind when he started writing the manga, but once it made its debut, it was all anyone could talk about. It's both Guts' greatest strength and his greatest weakness, and yes, it is inspired by those warriors that you're thinking of in your head right now. So without wasting too much of your time, we'll dive straight into it. This is the Berserker Armour and its origins, explained. Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. It is inspired by fearless warriors who would inspire terror amongst their own comrades. Berserkers in real life. Like most major things in Berserk, the Berserker Armour is inspired by a certain type of warriors who originated in Northern Europe. In Old Norse, the term Berserker translates into bear shirt. It refers to a class of fighters who would, as their name suggests, don bear shirts into battle or sport other bear-based paraphernalia. Berserkers in Scandinavian history and lore were warriors who fought in a trance-like fury. When in battle, they would be unstoppable and fight as if spurred on by an otherworldly power. A single blow from them could prove lethal, while they could tank multiple attacks thanks to their battle frenzy. The reason the Berserker's rage is described as being trance-like is because they would act borderline insane in battle. Descriptions of Berserkers in poems and other pieces of literature often talk of them as foaming at the mouth and gnawing at their shields when engaged in a fight. Their battle cries would sound animalistic, and when they were in their frenzied state, neither flame nor iron could hurt them. Once the fight was over, the Berserker would fall over with a high fever and spend days weakened and tamed by his explosive fighting, but it would be worth all the havoc they wreak across the battlefield. A similar class of warriors who donned wolfskins as their battle armor, known as the Ufevnar, are said to be the fierce warriors of Odin and have a battle disposition not unlike that of the Berserkers. While their beliefs and the terminology surrounding them are different, the Berserkers and the Ufevnar fall under the same class of, if you see them on a battlefield, your best course of advancement is to retreat. Sources disagree on exactly how this state of battle frenzy and enhanced bloodlust was induced. The spiritual belief is that these warriors would often sacrifice to bears in exchange for their strength. It might sound silly, but bear cults were a thing in ancient history. From Scandinavia to Japan, bears and wolves have been looked at as primal symbols of strength and ferocity. Bears in particular are revered for their insane strength, and so it is possible that certain sacred rituals were conducted to induce the fighting spirit of a bear within a human vessel. The behavioral thought process on why berserkers behaved the way they did is that those specific people spent a lot of time in the wild with these animals, hence their characteristics rubbed off on them a lot more than usual. The final argument, which in our opinion seems most likely, is that the berserkers were given drugs before they entered battles to induce that frenzied state within them. This is most likely one of the bigger factors in the existence of berserkers, especially when talking about artificially inducing that feral state of rage, because there are many things in nature that can make a man behave like that. Henbane, for example, is a plant that possesses psychoactive properties, but is also poisonous to humans in unchecked doses. Its effects on the human mind are similar to nutmeg, but in all the worst ways possible. One of the side effects of a henbane high is delirium, which is a state that can be very similar to a berserker frenzy. If you ask us, the existence of berserkers was influenced by all three of these factors coming together, and many others besides. It isn't easy to pinpoint just how or why people started fighting like fearless savages clad in bear and wolf pelts, but it is easy to tell you why they were feared. The idea that berserkers would wear nothing but bearskin into battle is a fabrication that enhances their fierce reputation, but that's all it does, because berserkers were boundless to begin with. They had the reputation of ravaging the lands and violating the women within their own communities. and berserkers aren't exactly spoken of favorably in Old Norse texts. If a person is so blinded by their rage that they can't tell friend from foe, no wonder you would have mixed feelings about their acts in society, no matter how great they might be on the battlefield. There is a way to induce the berserker mindset without any of the above, but for that, we're going to have to direct you to episode 5 of the Peacock docuseries WWE Evil, because no one can explain how to lose your absolute cabbage consciously better than the legend killer Randy Orton himself. Having said all this, berserker fighting tactics were clearly high cost, high reward, as these warriors were often employed as shock troops in warfare. But leave it to Miura-sensei to give us a true one-man berserker army in our favorite black swordsman, and he did it just when Guts needed a new weapon in his arsenal as well, which is what makes it that much sweeter for us. Wounds beyond flesh and a weapon beyond reason or ego. The Berserker Armour's introduction. Kentaro Miura was a master of pacing the story exceptionally, even though he himself had a habit of taking long hiatuses. There is not a single moment or development in Berserk that doesn't have a basis in something that has happened in the past. New characters are tied into old ones seamlessly, and new concepts and objects are given purpose well before they are shown on panel. The introduction of the Berserker Armour was set up before Guts & Co. even arrived at Enoch Village. As the Black Swordsman party was setting out on their journey to free the aforementioned village from trolls, Guts felt his brand twitch and caught a glimpse of a shadow in the central window of Flora's Spirit Tree mansion. He didn't think much of it because the presence didn't make his brand of sacrifice start leaking blood like a faulty faucet, but perhaps he should have, because Flora's visitor was none other than Skull Knight. The old witch greets her guest and, after musing about Shirkei's journey for a while, asks him what is the favor that he needed from her, and whether he is genuinely looking out for Guts or just using him for his own revenge. If you want to know what this revenge business is all about, then check out our Skull Knight and Void Origins videos, but the foe of the Inhumans answers his old friend's questions in his usual cryptic fashion. He says that even if he doesn't do it himself, Guts' involvement in all of this might be guided by the law of causality, and so he needs Flora to do him a solid. While she works on this favor, which is the first time we've seen Skull Knight ask for something in the manga by the way, the foe of the Inhumans takes a short detour to Cliphop, where he helps Guts defeat a partial manifestation of Slan. He also helps the Black Swordsman escape the collapsing domain by cutting open a tear in spacetime itself, thanks to his sword of actuation. Upon his return, he finds his old friend still hard at work, but in chapter 222, Flora finally completes doing what Skull Knight had called in his favor card for. She notes that it turned out to be a bigger job than expected in the end, yet she couldn't help but feel nostalgic when she saw the results of her work being chiseling a gigantic warding talisman on what looked like the breastplate of a suit of armor. We saw a similar talisman being applied to Guts' brand of sacrifice by Shirkei, so we assume that this was also something to do with the brand itself, but oh how wrong we were. Flora is glad for Skull Knight's business because it means she gets to meet an old friend in the final moments of her life, but still she can't believe they were going to have to use this in their fight against the Inhumans. The Wandering Wraith knows Flora is aware of the risks of the item in front of them, and she tells him that she is all too aware of it as well, having been its keeper and guardian for so long. But that is what made it all the more necessary for the journey Guts and his party were embarking upon. The Skull Knight begins to call that fact karmic, but Flora cuts him off and tells him karma is not a circle but a spiral. There was no certainty that the struggler of today would follow the exact same path as the struggler from history. The Black Swordsman and Shirkei's disciple need not go down the same paths as Skull Knight and Flora, and the foe of the Inhumans agrees with his friend on that much at the very least. Their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Griffith's war demons, who have orders to take out Flora. Skull Knight mounts his horse and draws his sword to defend his friend in her final moments, so she can at least die in peace. He is joined in his defense by Guts soon after, who has just arrived with his party from their journey to Clipoff. Despite sporting a massive astral chest wound, the Black Swordsman has an on-site policy for apostle slaying, so he gets to work with Dragon Slayer. Guts can't perform at his peak strength for obvious reasons, but between him and Skull Knight, they could mow down base-level apostles as if they were cutting grass on a Sunday. The problem was going to be Grunbeld. The Flame Dragon Knight stepped forward and challenged the Black Swordsman to a one-on-one contest of arms. Now, normally, Guts would be amped up as he was getting the opportunity to fight a strong opponent, something he had made his life's goal by a waterfall a long time ago. But because Grunbeld called himself a warrior of the Band of the Falcon, it threw Guts completely off his game. The Black Swordsman only managed to land one blow on the Flame Dragon Knight. The rest were all defense. Grunbeld's monstrous strength reopened Guts' wounds from Clipoff and most likely cracked several of his ribs. The Black Swordsman knew that without armor he was done for. Little did he know that his wish for protection was about to be granted. As Guts and the Skull Knight held off the apostles, Shirkei and the rest headed for the mansion to try and save Flora from the flames. but it was too late. Flora's chambers had already caught fire, and Shirke broke down at the realization that her mistress was truly going to die. Flora contacted her favorite pupil via thought transference and told her to take heart because she had an important role to play in the fight occurring outside. The mage trusted her disciple with the duty of bringing a very powerful but very dangerous magical fetish to the Black Swordsman in order to save his life, and we get our first proper shot of the Berserker Armour. All black and jagged and equipped with a skull-shaped visor, it looks more dangerous than safe, but we guess that's the whole point. Guts stumbles into Flora's treasure room thanks to an assist from Shirke's golems, and his condition is somehow worse than when he left Clipaw. Shirke is concerned that if she puts him in the armor in this state, it might just endanger his life, but Guts reassures her by grabbing his arm. Seeing that they have no other choice left, the magus assents, and Isidro, Serpico, and Farnace put the armor onto his body. Just as they're done suiting up Guts, an apostle breaks into the treasure room looking for Flora, and Isidro cries out in surprise. But before he can do anything, he's spanked away by an armored hand. A silhouette black as sin appears in front of the apostle's jaws, and this is where we start seeing the Berserker Armour in action. It grants its wearers inhuman strength and agility, but it also turns them into their personal beasts of darkness, the power and curse of the Berserker Armour. As Grunbeld continues his search for Guts, the apostle who attacked the treasure room stumbles out of it begging for help. Apparently, he ate the Black Swordsman, but was having some troubles keeping him down because for some reason, it kept hurting. Turns out that was because Guts was chopping him up from the inside with the Dragon Slayer. Normally, the Black Swordsman's movements, while feral, were highly calculated. If you've seen our Dragon Slayer Explained video, then you will know that Guts never wastes a single slash on his enemies, because that was the only kind of fighting style that would allow him to wield his unwieldy sword. So we knew something was immediately off when he emerged from the belly of this particular beast, because Guts didn't just split him open to escape. As we said before, he chopped him up into little pieces. Another apostle tried to finish off the leftovers from Griffith's eclipse, but he too suffered a similar fate. The Black Swordsman bisected him so viciously that it sprayed him with the apostle's blood and guts. Both Grunbeld and Guts' allies were left stunned with this mind-boggling display of strength. The Flame Dragon Knight thought it was a completely different person initially. The fact that Guts had Dragon Slayer in his hand is what confirmed his identity for Grunbeld. Isidro was psyched to say the least. He was gushing over Guts' newfound strength, and asked Shirke why she didn't bring out the armor for their troll fight earlier. But she explained that what was happening to Guts wasn't as simple as a power-up. Nosferatu Zod, who is one of the observers of the carnage left in the wake of the Black Swordsman, takes one look at the Berserker armor and instinctively understands what was happening. He looks at his old rival with a look of nostalgia, and asks him whether he intends for Guts to follow the same path into hell as himself, but the wandering wraith remains silent. This will be important later. For now, let's get back to why Shirke shut down Isidro's fanboying real quick and talk about how Guts was feeling inside the armor. The Black Swordsman was shocked to find that he didn't feel the pain from his wounds anymore. No, that wasn't it. Pain as a sensation just didn't matter to him. Well, that was great for a fight as intense as this. What was even better, or perhaps worse, was this impulse rising within Guts. The Berserker armor pulled his psyche into the depths of his rage and bloodlust, and brought his inner beast of darkness to the surface. Violence, hatred, anger. These became the only thoughts within Guts' mind. His beast of darkness beckoned him to yield his very being to his malice, and in that moment, the shape of the armor changed. The Berserker armor, having aligned itself with Guts' primal emotions, changed the shape of its visor to match his inner beast of darkness. The skull was replaced by the head of the jagged-toothed wolf that Miura uses to represent Guts' malice, and as soon as the alignment process was over, the real battle began. The Black Swordsman leapt at the Flame Dragon Knight's massive shield and pushed him back with the sheer force of his jump. Guts twisted and twirled about Grunbeld's humongous frame like a whirlwind of death. He hacked the Apostle's shield into pieces with half a dozen crushing blows from Dragon Slayer, and put it entirely out of commission by blasting his arm cannon into its cannon opening. Grunbeld is completely stunned by this total shift in fighting style, and so is Isidro. He knows that Guts is usually a monster in a fight, but this was totally different. Shirke explains that that is not something to be impressed by, because it's a consequence of the Berserker armor's powers. The armor, created by dwarves, was imbued with an ominous ode that, when aligned with a user, consumes their psyche with negative thoughts and emotions. Pain is a sensation that acts as a natural boundary for human beings, because it tells us where our limits lie. The Berserker armor removes that boundary, allowing a person to fight as if they were superhuman at the cost of their own lives. As an immediate example, we see Guts' new armor leaking blood from every nook and crevice. Serpico and Isidro's look of admiration transforms into one of horror as they continue observing the Black Swordsman's fight. Grunbeld, enthralled by Guts' new wind, proceeds to swing his warhammer at his enemy, but the Berserker manages to break it with 2 swings. Guts swings Dragonslayer so hard at Grunbeld's head that if he hadn't held up his warhammer for protection, he'd be dead by now, and all Guts would have to show for it was a heavily bleeding arm. The Apostle's bloodlust only intensifies after his own blood is spilt, and Grunbeld declares Guts won their fight as humans, but now he will fight him as an Apostle as he assumes his Flame Dragon form. The monstrous Apostle swings at Guts with his corundum-crusted tail at full force and totally expects to finish him off as well, which is why Grunbeld and everyone else watching is shocked when the Black Swordsman manages to stop it. What's more is that Guts not only stops Grunbeld, but cracks his corundum skin with the Dragonslayer before retreating for a breather, because the Black Swordsman's skeleton needed a bit of rearrangement. His left arm and leg were bent at sickening angles from blocking Grunbeld's tail earlier. The only reason he could even keep fighting was the Berserker Armour, but it didn't just heal Guts' body. The armor bit into his skin and pierced his bones, putting them back into place forcibly. Shirke recalls hearing that the last owner of the armor died fighting in it. The Berserker Armor had eaten into his body and drained him of every last drop of blood. Isidro's earlier excitement turns into exasperation soon enough, and he questions why Shirke would put Guts in such a thing knowing the risks. The young mage herself is questioning her mistress's dying request, but Flora contacts Shirke and reaffirms her in her skills and the task in front of her. Shirke manages to dive into the Berserker Armor's ode with her luminous body and travels through all of the negative, tumultuous emotions running through it to reach the talisman Flora had applied on it earlier. Turns out, it was a way to protect Guts' ego from total collapse, because had she not done this, Shirke would probably not have been able to pull Guts out of his Berserker fury. While she was trying to dig him out of his own malice, Guts was slicing through Apostles like a hot knife through butter. One of them managed to catch him within its jaws, but the Berserker Armor was very intuitive, and it fixed both itself and the gaping hole in Guts' chest in an instant. The Black Swordsman was so lost in his fury that his thoughts were one-worded, and none of them could be called good. Kill, ruin, hate, war. The only reason he stopped thinking about these things and killing Griffith is because Shirke reminded his ego of his primary task, protecting Casca. The image of the woman he loves brings Guts back to his senses. He shifts his attention from killing Apostles to saving his friends. Guts chucks Dragonslayer in the direction of the Apostles attacking Serpico and Isidro, and finishes its job by catching it mid-swing. He then saves Casca and Farnace from another Apostle intent on eating the former as a branded one. Farnace is confused as to who this person is for a moment, and turns out she was kind of right to feel that way, because when Guts' visor pulls off his face, we can see the effect the Berserker Armor has had on his face. It feels like it's aged several years more than it should have at this point, and he even has a patch of white hair above his lost eye now. Had he still been under the influence of the Berserker Armor, Guts would have likely met Grunbeld's flames head first. Instead, he chose to protect Shirke and escape with his comrades, as Flora's daemon form gave them a way out. We want to say that this was the right choice, because obviously Berserk ends if Guts dies, but perhaps he should have just given up and fought to death. That is how bad getting the Berserker Armor off of him was. The steel of the armor ate into Guts' flesh, and every time Shirke and the rest would try to take it off of him, waves of blood would flow out instead. When they finally did manage to get it off, Guts spent much of his time convulsing and screaming out in mind-numbing pain. He slipped in and out of consciousness so much that he didn't even notice Shirke and the elves working their medicinal magic on him, and when he recovered, he recklessly dove right back into things. Shirke was worried Guts will die if he keeps going at this rate, and she isn't exactly too far off the mark either. The Black Swordsman had visibly lost weight and body mass after wearing the Berserker Armor once. His entire body was covered in scars from wounds that had just now healed, and to top things off, he was losing his senses. And no, we're not talking about his berserker temper, we're talking about his literal senses. Guts and Shirke are visited by the Skull Knight on their way to Vertanis, where the Wandering Wraith immediately deduces the physiological changes in the body of his fellow struggler. The eyes start losing color and light. Food tastes tasteless. The hands tremble as if being shaken by another force. These are the side effects of the Berserker Armor, especially when one uses it in its feral state. Guts gave in to the armor's malign ode, which is like an ever-raging fire, and if he does so once again, he will come out of it burnt to a crisp. The Black Swordsman tells the Skull Knight he was going to master and tame the Berserker Armor with his own temperance, but it becomes clear rather quickly that Guts' trigger word is Griffith. His entire speech about showing Skull Knight he can hold back the armor with his own mind goes to crap when the Wandering Wraith tells him that he might find Griffith at Vertanis. The armor immediately starts creeping over Guts' head, and it takes a big, concentrated effort to not lose himself to the malice that keeps Guts from going berserk unintentionally. Skull Knight leaves Guts with a warning and a ray of hope regarding the endpoint of his journey, but it is the former that wins out in the moments following his departure. No matter how much Guts tries to draw out the armor's minimum power while maintaining his sanity, one thing or another is bound to make you snap during a fight. That is exactly what happened when Pishachi familiars attacked the cottage that he and his party were resting at, and Guts once again lost himself to his berserker fury. Though it allowed him to slay a Makara, it also almost got his friends killed. If it hadn't been for the presence and ode of the Moonlight Boy, Berserk's happy days might have ended before chapter 250 even dropped, and with every subsequent use of the armor, Guts' fighting style only became more and more feral. At Vertanis, he was still a bit more controlled thanks to Shirke possessing him from the get-go, but at Yzma's Island, Guts lost it good and proper. He became so engrossed in killing the tentacles of the sea god that he didn't even care about fighting style or openings. He was using the Berserker Armor's visor as a mouth and chomping through the tentacle slugs like a vicious carnivore. It made even his comrades sick to watch him fight the way he was, and they were used to this kind of stuff by now. The Berserker Armor has assisted the Black Swordsman in taking down every enemy he has come across, except Griffith, and that is where the true significance of the Berserker Armor comes into play with regards to Berserk's overall story. The past, the present, and the future. The significance of the Berserker Armor and its role in the story. After cutting through hundreds of Pishacha, Daka, apostles, golems, a wicker man, and even a sea god, Guts finally makes it to the destination he decided upon after leaving St. Albion, Elfhelm, the utopian home of Puck. He finally gets to fulfill the desire he's been working towards fulfilling since the conclusion of the eclipse, as thanks to the Flowerstorm Monarch, Shirke, and Farnese, Casca's mind is restored to its normal state. But all of it seems worthless when she can't even bring herself to face him because of suffering from intense PTSD. The Black Swordsman simply trains himself to the brink of insanity once again, because there is truly nothing else he can do. This is when he is approached by the Skull Knight. The foe of the Inhumans tells Guts that what lies at the end of his journey isn't necessarily a happy sight, because causality was yet to converge. Before Guts can ask him what he meant, Guru Gedfring approaches the pair, and we learn that Skull Knight knew him back when he used to be a child. Gedfring had apparently had many audiences with the Knight in his youth, back when Skull Knight was a human. If you want to know why Gedfring would be acting like a supplicant for the Wandering Wraith, we suggest that you watch our Skull Knight and King Geiseric Origins videos. The Great Guru asks Guts about his association with the foe of the Inhumans, and the Black Swordsman's answer prompts the trio to pay a visit to the armor's creator, the dwarven blacksmith called Hanar. When Guts enters Hanar's forge, he is immediately reminded of Godot, the man who gave him shelter during his peregrination and created the Dragon Slayer sword. The dwarf addresses the Skull Knight as king once again, and notes that he still isn't resting in peace thanks to his creation. When Skull Knight thanks him for keeping his soul in good health, Hanar pointedly remarks that he's just a wraith in a coffin at this point. He is more concerned that his life's greatest and worst creation has also returned to his doorstep. Hanar muses that he never thought he would see the Berserker Armor again, let alone see both it and Skull Knight's armor at the same time. He notes that Guts has been making extensive use of it, but as the creator of the armor, he knows that the Black Swordsman is yet to master it. Using something isn't the same as having complete mastery over it, and if left unchecked for even a fraction of a second, the Berserker Armor was likely to devour its wearer. Hanar thinks to himself that Gedfring's suggestion of a lecture on the armor's abilities wasn't a bad idea after all, but he isn't the type to use words to do his explaining. He strikes Guts' armor with his hammer, and instantly, the Berserker Armor activates and envelops his body. The Black Swordsman lets out a howl like a wolf, but Hanar simply summons a few chains and tells him to pipe down. Well, it's more like he's asking the armor to pipe down, because Guts' malice is aligned with its ode, making them one and the same from a technical standpoint. Shirke pipes up and asks Hanar what their intention was behind restraining Guts like this, and Hanar answers by telling her he was about to show him the bloody memories dyed into the armor. He strikes his own creation with his hammer once again, and the scene shifts to what can only be called a hellscape. Massive, fleshy tentacles writhe all over what looks like the walls of a city. The abyss that is Berserk's hell looms in the background, and 5 silhouettes stand atop a raised mound that resembles an altar. Entities that look like apostles try to reach out for the former wearer of the Berserker Armor, but he slashes them all into red ribbons. What Guts was experiencing was the final moments of Skull Knight's life as a human, before the Berserker Armor drained him of every last drop of blood. The nightmarish landscape that his predecessor was traversing through looked like Griffith's Eclipse, but far worse in terms of its scale. For starters, Griffith's Eclipse did not have the literal abyss swirling in the background. He sank into it once his rebirth cocoon manifested atop the God Hand's altar, But the abyss itself did not open up in that abstract place and time. Here, it was swirling in the background, as if it were the sun itself. The second and more interesting thing to note here is that the tentacles we just spoke of seem to be clinging to walls. Griffith's eclipse took place on a lake outside of Midland. The landscape of his eclipse looked as if the sea and the sun had both been replaced by tortured faces. The only structures we found within it were the cliffs nearby, and the God Hand altar manifested by Conrad. Conversely, it looks as if the demonic ritual that led to the Skull Knight's death as a human took place inside a room or an alley in a city. Miura would be keeping with the theme if the 5 silhouettes we referred to earlier were also entirely different from the God Hand we know today. But there is one entity that links that distant point in time to Guts' current one, and that is the Void. Seeing the Archangel of Demonkind aligns both Guts and Skull Knight's memories into a synchronized state. The Black Swordsman leaps for Hanar in the real world, who was standing in Void's position, and the dwarf remarks on his insane strength given that he was able to break through the dwarf's magical bonds. Because Guts can slash his face into bits, he stops because the armor shows him an image of the Skull Knight holding his own branded lover in his arms. The woman, who looks a lot like the Flower Storm Monarch, seemingly dies as the ground beneath her catches flames and takes the shape of a massive brand of sacrifice, like the incarnation ceremony where Femto was reborn in the body of Griffith. Guts falls out of the memory and is convinced that it was an eclipse. He goes to ask his old pal as much, but the Skull Knight tells him that what he saw was the end of a foolish king and the beginning of a wraith wandering through the endless night. This is important because it potentially ties into the Black Swordsman's own fate. After returning to the Cherry Blossom Spirit Tree from the underbelly of Elfhelm, Guts and his party are attacked by Griffith's war demons. They were led there by the Falcon of Darkness himself, who was only able to invade the island thanks to his shared body with the Moonlight Boy. Curiously enough, the Berserker Armour tries to take control of Guts, but he, in front of Griffith no less, is able to hold it at bay. It doesn't bode well for his future though, because every swing he swings towards his former friend just misses. After Elfhelm's destruction, Guts is brought on board the Seahorse, and for the first time, we see him broken completely. He, who doesn't let go of Dragonslayer even when his ribs are being broken, allows it to fall to the floorboards as he curls up into a ball of despair. Shirke tries to reach him, but it is of no use. This is where we left Berserk in chapter 371, but the most important panel in our opinion isn't the one that shows Guts crying like a baby. It's the one where Shirke sees the teeth of a gnarly beast draw blood from within its own jaws, chains breaking at the edges of the panel. If the Berserker Armor is what killed King Gyseric when he was a human, then it is pretty much guaranteed that Guts will also die it. That's just how storytelling works. What is more important to note is the way in which that might happen. Skull Knight has told Guts repeatedly that the Berserker Armor will consume his human life from him and leave him as a ball of rage and revenge. That is probably what happened to him at the end of his life as well, which is why Hanar had to make him a new armor so he could contain his soul within it. Guts, however, doesn't seem to be destined for an afterlife at all. As one who is branded to be sacrificed to demonkind, everything, from his last breath to the last drop of his blood, belongs to the Abyss. We don't know if Skull Knight was branded before he became a wraith. If he was, then Guts becoming a vengeful spirit makes more sense. But if he wasn't, then the idea that when Guts dies the story ends becomes very real, and he's already knocking at death's door. His vision has deteriorated so much that he can't even throw a knife or swing his sword like he used to. He has to bandage Dragonslayer to his palm to swing it without accidentally letting go of it. Now that Guts is within the very depths of his despair, and the Moonlight Boy is clearly no longer a factor in stopping him from going berserk, where do we go now? It's clear that the story of Berserk has to end with a confrontation between Guts and Griffith, but Griffith's vessel is made from the flesh of Guts' own child, who has been shown to be the only astral being that can reliably pull him out of his berserker state. With Griffith taking Casca to Falconia and the Beast of Darkness just itching to jump out of Guts' psyche, what will happen to the people aboard the Seahorse? Only time and Kujimori can tell. Marvelous verdict. And that's all for this video. The Berserker Armor is our favorite fantasy object, maybe of all time, because of how awesome and dangerous it can give you super strength, super speed, and a swing to kill ratio that any basic warrior wench would die for. But it can suck you into the vortex of negativity that lurks within your mind, and put the very people you love at the risk of death. It is Guts' best and worst weapon, and the inspiration behind several other gaming and anime figures for a reason. How it figures into the final battle remains to be seen, but for now, what we want to know is what you guys think about it. Let us know your thoughts on the Berserker Armor in the comments section down below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe out there, and thanks for watching.